Erik, Chapter 18. I fled up one hallway and down the next. I was fairly certain that I knew where I was, even though I had never taken this route before. This suddenly seemed like a potentially fatal oversight, but I thought I would survive. Had I not been the undisputed king of this, my underground kingdom, for the past 5 years or more? I arrived at a crossing of corridors where I knew there was a staircase that would lead me to the surface. I hoped to slip past any straggling members of the mob on the ground level and out the door into the Parisian night. I looked around me, searching for the door to the stairs. It was not there. My gaze darted wildly from one corner to the next, seeking to find out where I had gone wrong. I held back the panic that started to rise inside me as I tried to get myself back on course. Suddenly, a hand caught my cloak and tugged on it. I suppressed a startled yell, but it still came out as an undignified little squawk of surprise. I whirled to confront the owner of the hand. Antoinette stood there, with one hand on my cloak and the other on her lips. She tugged on my cloak once more, gestured with her head to a dark passageway, and moved silently in that direction. I watched her go with mild astonishment. Her smooth, silent gait was nearly as elegantly stealthy as my own. She had always seemed to me to be an old lady whose youthful grace had gone. It seemed she'd been hiding some parts of herself from me. I felt slightly bemused as I followed the slim, graceful, silent figure to safety. Together, we exited the building into the dark night. There were street lamps, as was usual for the city in those days, but the moon was hidden behind a thick layer of cloud. We moved away from the main thoroughfares into a more residential area, and the street lamps became fewer and further between. I relaxed a little bit as the darkness covered my form and hid my mask. By chance, I had grabbed one of the black masks I'd had made in Persia. I felt nearly invisible as we walked quickly down the sidewalks. A group of young men passed us, talking excitedly about the lynching at the opera tonight. Such fun! Hope it's not over yet. It seemed word was spreading about the events of the evening. I turned aside as they passed us, heading back the other way to the Palais Garnier. They did not notice me. After more twists and turns than I could successfully memorize, Antoinette pulled me into a doorway and unlocked the plain door with a key. She pulled me up the staircase on the other side and unlocked a second door at the top with a second key. I stumbled into her apartment and stood awkwardly in the middle of the small space. She bustled about, urging me to sit down, taking my cloak and hat and indicating a settee where I might make myself comfortable. I watched her nervously, too wrought up to relax. I still did not know why she had brought me here. I wanted to be sure I could flee at a moment's notice if she summoned the gendarme. She stood in front of me with her hand on her hip and said something, but I did not catch what it was. The room had started to show signs that it might start to spin for some reason. I finally took her advice and seated myself on the settee. She repeated herself. "Have you eaten today?" I blinked at her, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. My stomach gave one loud rumble, as if to chime into the conversation and state that no, I hadn't eaten today, and I had expended much more energy than I usually did. Antoinette gave one cluck of disapproval and moved to cut me a thick slice from a loaf of fresh bread on the table. She pressed this into my hand, as well as a wedge of cheese. A tumbler of wine made its appearance in much the same fashion. I consumed everything greedily, then sat back as an unusual feeling of contentment stole over me. I couldn't remember the last time I had gotten pleasure from food. Much of what I'd eaten in my life had been substandard and scant. I supposed my body had simply learned to demand less. I was generally so busy with my various occupations that stopping to eat seemed a mere annoyance. I suddenly yawned deeply as the stresses of the evening caught up to me. Antoinette took my hand and pulled me to my feet, leading me down a short hall to a bedroom. I distantly heard her say that she was giving me Meg's bedroom and would make Meg sleep with her when she arrived home. I nodded fuzzily, entered the room, fell on the bed, kicked my shoes off, and fell fast asleep. I woke. I kept my eyes squeezed shut for a moment longer, but it was no use. I opened my eyes and recoiled as a bright beam of sunshine struck them. I sat up and looked around. Pink surrounded me everywhere. I lay on a bed that was clothed in pink linens. The walls were pink. There were posters on the walls of famous ballet dancers dressed in pink. Sunshine poured in through a little window, making everything seem 50 shades pinker than it might have if I had ever permitted this gaudy color in my own rooms. I closed my eyes against the beginnings of a migraine, triggered by the relentless light. I missed the forgiving glow of candles and oil lamps already. The pain faded a little, enough that I felt I could rise. I sat up, checked to make sure my mask was in place, and slipped back into my shoes. Then I went back down the hall to the small kitchen I'd sat in last night. Antoinette stood at the cook stove. The delicious aroma of eggs frying in bacon grease met my nostrils, and my stomach rumbled again. I couldn't remember the last time I had feasted on bacon. It had probably been some time before my sojourn in Persia, as bacon was forbidden there. As I ate, Antoinette told me what she had been able to find out so far this morning. It seemed the entire Parisian police force had proven unequal to the task of finding me. Hardly a surprise, I thought to myself. Another rumor said my rooms under the opera had been swept by fire, although a competing rumor said that I had trapped 50 men in my chamber to slowly go mad. I thought this rumor was probably closer to the truth, and secretly thanked fate that I had constructed my mirrored chamber. However, the next thing she said concerned me deeply. It is only a matter of time until the police begin questioning people who are associated with the opera. And if they find you with us, they will hang us all three together. So today, we will pack our things, and we will be on the 3:40 train to Calais when it leaves the station. Then, we take the first steamer we can find to America. She began clearing dishes from the table. I rose halfway from my chair, protest spilling from my lips. 2 trips across tiny seas had nearly finished me, and now she expected me to cross an ocean? My stomach gave a warning flare of pain at the very idea. She dismissed my explanations and protests with the stern glare that was so effective on her ballerinas. But I was not one of them. I glared right back at her, folding my arms in defiance. I don't know what happened next, because my memory skips to the part where I awoke in cramped blackness. I had felt myself lifted into the air and jostled about. I pushed out on all sides of me and felt unyielding walls boxing me in. The only light came through a keyhole-shaped opening near my navel. I yelled indignantly, and the movement of the box stopped. The light coming through the keyhole was blocked by something. I heard Antoinette's voice coming through it. "Calm down in there. We're going through with our plan, one way or the other. We are currently carrying the trunk you are in down to the wagon in the street. We will let you out once we are safely in our cabin on the steamer." And the box was lifted into the air again. I called out once more. "No, please, let me out, Antoinette. I can't bear to be confined like this." The pathetic ring of desperation in my voice sent my mind whirling back to my days with the traveling fair, and I hated myself for it. The box was again set down, and I heard nothing more for a long, agonizing moment. The trunk opened, and I scrambled to get out of it. I stood from it and slammed the lid before turning on her angrily. Meg, who had been helping her carry the trunk, shrank nervously away, but Antoinette stood firm. "We are going, monsieur. That is final. And you are coming with us. That, too, is final. I have fresh ginger that will help you survive the trip. It is only 6 days. Now, You can either come on foot, as we do, or you can ride in the trunk." She watched me hesitate and pressed her case. "France is no longer your home. You are a wanted criminal, and we are your accomplices. You have to leave, and we have to leave with you. The best opportunity for future success lies in America." Seeing every other avenue closed to me, I miserably nodded my head. The trip was every bit as hellish as I'd feared it would be. At least the private cabin I'd rented for the three of us had a tiny water closet where I could be ill in relative privacy. I don't think I spent more than an hour in my bunk at any point, because my stomach was always driving me in there. Not even Antoinette's ginger seemed to help. In my odd lucid moments, I idly designed and constructed a torture system in my head that made diabolical use of the heaving, randomly timed waves that were wreaking such havoc on my body. Eventually the cry came that my landlubber's heart had been dying to hear. "Land ho!" I finished being ill for what I sincerely hoped was the final time, and returned to sprawl, exhausted, on my bunk. I soon woke, however, as I heard Meg burst into our cabin and speak urgently to her mother.
"Mama, I heard the customs officer on the deck speaking to the family in the next cabin. They asked how many passengers wished to enter America. Then they asked if any of them were infirm or deformed, saying those people would be turned around and sent back. Then they warned the family that it's a federal offense to make a false statement to a customs officer. What will we do? If they see him," she gestured with her head to me, "we won't be able to get off the boat."
Antoinette whirled to look at me, as if I would give her the solution to our problem. I simply closed my eyes in exhaustion. I didn't care about much at that point, besides getting off that bloody, floating torture chamber. I much preferred that happen now, but if it didn't happen until the boat returned to France, then I couldn't bring myself to care. In the end, I found myself confined inside the trunk once more. I heard Antoinette declare to the customs officer that there were only 2 passengers, and that they carried only personal goods.
"That trunk there is full of books, officer. The key? Oh, the key. Where did I put it?"
I twisted my fingers together as I tried to keep the panic at bay and maintain my silence. Dark visions passed before my eyes. I saw myself beset by all kinds of evils, unable to escape the box that held me captive. The one that recurred most often was the sensation of being lifted and tipped over the rail of the steamer into the cold Atlantic. My morbid imagination, determined to torment me, imagined in crystal clear detail what it would feel like to feel the frigid salt water invade the trunk, the panic I would feel as I tried to maneuver my head into the last remaining air pocket, the burning desperation of realizing I couldn't hold my breath anymore, and the horror of gasping in a breath that contained no oxygen at all. It was as if my imagination insisted that I be prepared for the horror I would experience in this situation, and was running a full dress rehearsal before my mind's eye. My fear of confinement and my fear of the water were combining to torment me in the most horrific fashion imaginable. I beat back my imagination with immense effort, holding tight to the promise Antoinette had made me as she closed the lid and locked it. "I promise you, I will let you out when we arrive in our hotel. Do not make a sound until then, or I will not be able to save you." Eventually, I felt myself lifted and carried for several minutes. We walked down an incline that I assumed was the ramp leading off the ship. Then I was set on a flat surface. There was a jerk, and my trunk began to bounce a little bit. I took this to mean I was on a cart and being driven away from the docks. Then I was lifted again, carried up some stairs, throwing me to the bottom end of the box as they did so, and set down again. I spent some of the time reliving the memory of being in Christine's arms. In my head, I kissed her over and over again. I heard her moan of excitement ringing in my ears as my mind replayed what we had done. Eventually, I had to push this picture out of my head, too. I switched to the safer mental hobby of inventing new music from the bits and pieces of musical phrases that darted through my mind. It calmed me so much that I wished I had known how to compose music during the previous times I had been confined. The scrape of the key in the lock brought me out of my reverie, and all the agitation I'd been holding at bay seemed to wash over me all at once. Sudden desperation to be out of the box overwhelmed me, and as the lid rose, I burst upwards out of confinement. I threw my arms around Antoinette, startling her. She dropped the key on the floor and awkwardly hugged me back. I don't think she truly appreciated until then how difficult my brief confinement had been for me. I dropped my arms and stood back. I could feel my cheeks flaming in embarrassment as I tried to cover my little outburst. I looked around me. We were in a small, shabby hotel room with 2 beds. Antoinette and Meg were settling into one bed, leaving the other for me. I dropped onto it gratefully, thanking anything that might be listening for the stability of the room around me. If I never had to get onto another boat again, it would be too soon. I slept deeply without dreaming. When I awoke, I discovered that my mind, freed from the influences of sickness, had come up with a plan to support myself here in America and help support the ladies as well. I told Antoinette where I'd be, pocketed the room key, and strode out the door. I returned that evening with my prize. It had taken me nearly all day, searching what felt like every pawn shop and junk shop in New York City. But I held under my arm what I firmly felt to be the best and cheapest violin available in the city. It came with a sturdy case, a bow, and all the requisite accessories. I'd tested it in the shop, and it had a beautiful tone, and seemed to fit my shoulder like it was custom built for me. I had no doubt that I could play it well enough to earn coins each day, especially here in America, where everyone seemed too self-involved to stare at me and my mask. I had noticed this all day as I went about my shopping. I wore my broad-brimmed hat tipped to the right, throwing my mask into its shadow. Everyone I spoke to took one look at it, and then decided that they wanted my business more than they wanted to stare. People I passed on the street kept their gazes on the sidewalk, unconcerned about seeing or being seen by the humanity that flowed around them, as they admired the bright visions of imminent prosperity in their mind's eyes. I was having some bright visions myself, as I took the measure of the people I found myself surrounded by, and decided what would be the best way to part them from some of their hard-earned cash. The next task that lay ahead of me was to find a place to play my violin. I scoured the entertainment district for venues or companies that needed a violinist. My luck held out, and I secured a spot as a busker with a carnival company. I insisted on signing a formal contract with them, much to their surprise. I think they were used to their performers being illiterate. But they duly signed a contract stating that I was to be given performance space in return for 15% of my daily takings. Newly employed, I returned to the hotel to inform the ladies. I planned that our next step would be to go find permanent lodging somewhere. To my surprise, Antoinette informed me that she and Meg were going to take the train clear across the continent to visit a relative in far-off California for a few months, before returning to start their life on the East Coast. There were several items of value that she carried that she did not want to risk on her transcontinental journey, so instead of searching for a flat, we instead sought a bank where we could rent a safe deposit box. I made a copy of my precious contract and consigned the original to the box. I debated putting in my onyx ring, but the memories of seeing it on Christine's finger were too dear to lock away in a box. Antoinette placed her few baubles inside, and we locked it up. The bank graciously provided us with 2 keys. I slid mine onto my silver chain, beside the now useless key to my Paris escape door. We spent one last night together in the hotel. I told them where I planned to find lodgings, and urged them to come visit when they returned from California. I anticipated that by then I would be bored with busking and would be on to bigger and better opportunities. I told them to ask for me under the name I'd given on my contract, Erik Leblanc. I no longer wished to call myself Le Maître, as it meant teacher. Remembering my days guiding Christine to stardom was too painful a memory to be brought up every time I introduced myself. Leblanc was a name that proudly informed others of my French origins, and I felt comfortable using it. It was a new name for a new life.